Hello, everyone. My name is Aisha Langford, and I'm the founder of Funeral Syllabus, where the motto is make a plan, keep the peace, leave a legacy. Today, I'll be talking with Theresa Skaar. She is a social psychologist and certified mind body skills facilitator. She has also created programs and workshops to help people navigate grief and also programs to help care partners manage the caregiving journey. Today, we'll be talking about practical strategies for navigating grief and also how we can all support care partners. Can you tell us a little bit about your professional journey and how did you get into helping people navigate grief and supporting care partners?
Yeah, thank you. It has, so my initial career was working as a nursing assistant back when I was 19, and life took me on a very windy path through corporate, working at corporate, an insurance company, engineering firm for, decades. And so, um, later I got laid off in the economic downturn. I went back to school, got my undergrad. So I still hadn't had my undergrad. I'd taken courses off and on, and I graduated with my undergrad at 41. And then I had a mentor who kept saying, like, what about grad school? So I went to grad school, and in grad school, I was so stressed that someone said, would you like to try meditation? I was like, I will literally try anything. So that's how I, found my way to the world of meditation and mindfulness. And I was also trained in mind body, or I am a mind body medicine. You mentioned that, but mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is John Kabat-Zinn. And I found my way to grief because I gravitate towards the things that we share. I am, and that, it crosses, who you love, socioeconomic status, where you live in the world. We are all going to experience grief because we are all here for a short amount of time and we don't know what that time is. And in this, and we often avoid these topics. And there's just something in me that is so drawn to navigating these human experiences, whether it's aging or grief, death, dying, because we're going to experience it. And so how can we talk about it? How can we support people who are navigating their own grief, knowing that we will navigate our own at some point, and every grief is different, which also makes it really interesting too. And so, this winding path of, personal experiences, life, and supporting my grandma at the end of her life, and our grandpa Jimmy, my husband's grandpa, being able to be with people and have these conversations because we celebrate so much about life, right? It's like, oh, we have gender reveal parties, we have birthdays, we have weddings, we have all of these things. And yet, this stage that all of us will face, we kind of go, nah, I'm not going to talk about this. So I've had some really beautiful conversations of asking, my grandma, and grandpa Jimmy, how are you feeling about this? Are you nervous? And my grandma's response was something like, you know, I don't have any regrets, and she said, I might have hurt some people, but and she's like, and I feel sorry for that, but boy, did I have fun. And so, just the fact that you stop and ask a question of the person. So that's a windy answer to how I got to here.
Okay. And we were talking about grief today. And how would
Yeah.
you define anticipatory grief and how does it manifest in care partners?
Oh, great question. So anticipatory grief is it's in the name. You're anticipating the grief that is going to happen. One of the interesting things about that, so it occurs before death. It's common among people who are facing the eventual death of a loved one or their own death. So this can be on either side of the experience. An interesting study found that 40% of widows found grief before death to be more stressful than grief after death. It also can involve like more heightened feelings, maybe a little more anger. There might be a little loss of emotional control, which might be atypical grief responses. And again, I think that all grief responses are valid. But some emotions associated with anticipatory grief would be, sadness, tearfulness, guilt, loneliness, fear, irritability, and anger. and then maybe a rehearsal of the death, thinking like how it's going to be. And it's this idea of there's a spectrum of emotions. And what happens often with care partners is that they either don't want their care, the person that they're caring with, to like feel bad, so there's like this, like, okay, I'm going to put on a happy face, but I'm having all this emotions. Then there's this outside interesting pressure that happens when, you're experiencing grief as a care partner, and then you have well-intended, well-meaning people in your life going, but they're still alive. Like, why are you sad? So it's a real interesting mix of how we're navigating anticipatory grief.
Okay. And to piggyback on that answer, how can care partners prepare themselves emotionally for the impending loss while still providing support?
I've experienced this personally and professionally with the people I support and the research that I've done. Nothing actually can prepare you for that eventuality. You can, as I had said, rehearse, or you think that this is how it's going to be. And for example, with my grandma, it was 10 years of her kind of dwindling in health, but every time she'd go to the hospital, I would be a wreck. I'd be, oh my gosh, okay, this is it. Can I say all the things? I never want to leave anything unsaid. And that's just kind of me in general, probably because of the topics that I have, and we never know when our last time is. But when you have this long drawn out experience of supporting people and doing care, that it wasn't this, when she actually died, like for real, I was like, oh, like, and it felt so foreign, so all of the things that I thought I was going to feel, all the things that I thought I was paving the way for, it was a different experience. And so I think that being present with your loved one as much as possible, or with your feelings, offering yourself compassion, saying like, okay, this is hard and I don't know how it will actually be. And it might, because in that forecasting, we can be like, this is hard, that's going to be 1,000 times worse, and it
Right.
will have its own different flavor from what's happening in this moment. And so offering yourself compassion, and as much as possible trying to bring yourself back to the present moment, and acknowledge like, I don't know how this will be. And if you think so, like having some point people on deck, because that might be the time in your anticipatory grief to say, okay, I think I might need, some support, or, I'm going to have my bestie be like in agreement that I know that it's safe to call at any point, and so having some things and structures in place, very supportive. Maybe a plan, not to do something, because they always recommend not making immediate decisions, but making a plan of like, okay, I'm going to, you know either whatever traditions that you are in, to call, have people maybe come stay with you or sit with you. You might have, be aware of like, oh, well, I don't want people around, so maybe having those conversations before you're in the thick of it.
Okay. And what are some healthy ways to process this anticipatory grief while our loved ones are still alive, if there's such a thing?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I like the tagline, if there is such a, or the tag on, if there
Right.
is such a thing. Um now, so I get a little hung up on the idea of like healthy, not healthy, and so supportive or skillful, or versus like draining. So I would say, ways to, support yourself as you are going into this would be, taking little mini mindful moments and saying like, okay, this is my feet on the floor, and acknowledging that this is grief and that it's okay. I love a long form letter, so, writing a letter, you could write a letter to your loved one who's dying, and not give it to them. You could then give it to them or share it with them, having moments of, connection that feel genuine with the person who has the life limiting, whatever is happening, if you can. And again, there's all we can think of 1,000 different scenarios. So I'll talk just broadly of, taking a moment, or two for yourself throughout the day. And I call these like mini mindfulness moments, or, they're often called informal meditation, where you're bringing your attention to the present moment on purpose, and you're paying attention, and you're just in the present moment. Because, you're care partners are juggling so much, like and I'm thinking maybe, child to elder parent right now, with, and then you're thinking like there's house, there's this, there's that, and there's appointments, and there's, like eating restrictions. So there is a lot of mental load. And so it is like coming back to the present moment, feeling your breath, feeling your feet on the floor, and allowing yourself to say, like, this is hard. And for people watching, I'm putting my hands to, or not listening, not watching. You can see, if you're watching, you can see me. But if you're listening, I'm putting my hands to heart center, which research shows actually releases oxytocin in the body. So it's a good self-soothing and comforting. So even if you're feeling kind of this, like, I don't know what to do or say, hand to heart center, take a breath. And if you don't know how to express yourself, just try not to beat yourself up. Try not to judge the experience that you're having, because judgment clouds and spins, we avoid, we pull away, and then we're not actually, kind of processing what's in front of us.
Okay. Wow, those are some great tips. How can care partners balance hope and realism in situations where there's a terminal illness or chronic condition? So I think it can be really hard. So you know that
Yeah.
something bad is happening, but you also want to stay hopeful and optimistic.
Yeah, and I think it's the I don't know piece, right?
Right.
And we talked a little bit about this, before we jumped on. What is within your control, what is within your values. You might even, with the care part, or the person that you're caring with, like, what are your values? Is it quantity, is it quality? Why am I doing extra treatments? For what reason? Is it out of a sense of obligation to my family? Oh, I should do this for my family. I have a dear friend who's, her mom had been diagnosed with lung cancer, and she was doing these treatments. And, my friend's like, oh, she's so sick, and then she's miserable, and then she's crabby. And I said, well, have you asked her why? Like, is she wanting to see your kids, her grandchildren, grown, like get married or graduate from high school? Like, is there a goal? Because I think those are also important things, so that you can, I'm getting a little away from the actual question of like hope. But I think that it's couched, or is that how we say that? It's in realism, so it's like, in the reality of this situation, what are your values? What do you want to do? And what's important? And how do you navigate that? My chosen mom, who passed at the end of November, she loved, like, her chips. She loved tortilla chips. And then she was on a low sodium diet, but she's also 97. And so, to me, I'm like, I don't want to do harm and give the woman her chips. And,
Right.
but then her direct care partner, her daughter, um, was like, I go to the doctor appointments, he's saying no sodium. And so she's asking me, is there sodium in seasoning packet for Caesar salad, and so it's an interesting thing, because she's like, I want to do the best for my mom. And, and so what does the person want? Because we often are giving care to, and that, and so that's why I come back to this language that I had learned about care partnering, because we want to trust in the autonomy of the person that we're supporting. And so, what is important to them? And so I think hope comes from, you know, it's also an imagined future. And so is despair. And so it's like, what is here in this moment? In this moment, they are here and this is the situation. And I'm not saying false gratitude either, because those things are hard. And I would never ever say to someone, oh, fa la la, this is good. But really truly what's present in here right now, and what are the values and what are the goals.
Right. So now just thinking about this idea of sometimes people feel relieved and
Mm,
also exhausted after
yeah.
a loved one dies. And so, how can care partners process those emotions without feeling guilty?
Oh, they're going to feel guilty. I mean,
Right.
like I think that that is a normal human response. And can we be okay with going like, oh, this feels weird. Like this feels weird that I'm relieved, or this feels like terrible to say, and usually the language gets, people say things like, well, I'm happy they're no longer suffering. But oftentimes there's been such a shift, even in relationship, that the person that they're grieving might not have been the person they're living with for the last 10 years. And I'm talking if someone's living with like dementia or Alzheimer's or something in that umbrella, they might not recognize that person. And so the grief has been happening. There's anticipatory grief, but there's also this real grief of like loss of what's happening, within this relationship of who I knew you to be, or who I relied on you to be. And so
Right.
I think that it's a tangly, messy thing. And I wish there was like a clean cut answer of like, do these 5 things and you won't feel guilty. But it's acknowledging like that is very human. You are tired. It is a lot. I mean, and like, let's just normalize saying like, I mean, personal care by family members is in the billions of dollars if you actually calculated it out. And it's unpaid, and it's often, in the midst of raising a family or having a full-time job, and you are like stretched so thin that and you're just barely on fumes. And so for anyone who's listening who's in that experience, like really truly, pause, hand to heart center, and go, this is hard, because it's hard. And when hard things are done, there is a relief, you know
Right.
and then there's guilt to the relief, and knowing like that is normal. And I love the name of your podcast, and I think your podcast in giving this voice to these things that we don't often talk about
Right.
is so important. So side note there.
Yeah, you were just talking about like caregivers and all of the different emotions. And so, what are some signs that a care partner may need some additional support, such as therapy or
Mm.
grief social support group after a loved one dies, or even maybe before a loved one dies?
That is, it is, so many things. One thing I want to say of like the before, it can feel like one more thing on the to-do list. Although with virtual, there's like more flexibility, and there are a lot of free resources, and it's hard to compile that when you're in the midst, in the thick of it. So, that is maybe, one of the things that, you and I could collaborate on, and finding like a resource page. And so then people can go like, this is where I can go to find, a support when I need it, and not trying to figure out where it is, because you're exhausted. It's hard to find.
Right.
But the things that I would say that you would be seeing of needing additional support before or after is, if you're not sleeping consistently, yes, there's going to be, sleepless nights, where if you are, having a change in appetite, kind of the benchmarks, if you're looking, if you were a clinician looking for signs of like anxiety and depression. But I would think that if it was like that sense of like hopelessness or despair, that they're just, barely functioning. And again, you're not skipping through these experiences, it's not this easy peasy lemon squeezy thing. But are you unable to, and actually many caregivers will say they lost themselves, or they don't know who they are anymore. And so that might be more of an after, but in the midst of it, and it's so hard to call out and ask for support.
Right,
I mean, it really is. And yet that's what's often needed, like, can you bring me a meal? Can you check on me? And so that can be really difficult and isolating feeling in general, which can lead to its own sense of depression. So how do I say that better? I just don't know. It's that
right.
I think most people could use support in any life, in
Yes.
any phase of life. So wherever someone is, is there someone that you can, call, or a support group or something where you feel less alone, so you have maybe a little lifeline as you're navigating this?
Right. No, that's so important. And I think normalizing that we all need help in different
Yeah.
ways throughout our lives, and it's okay to ask for help. And then I guess for family and friends and coworkers to offer help as well. I think sometimes it's we want to just stay out of people's business and not
Yes.
intrude, but sometimes kind of opening the door can help people maybe cross that bridge of either receiving help or at least being open to the idea of having help. Whether
Yeah, and on that, with social support, I will, and this is with grief in general, just caution people for using language like, I'm here for you, let me know if you need anything,
I,
because then that puts the onus back on the person who is grieving or going through this. And so concrete support offers is really beautiful. And one of the things, and I don't remember where I read it, but it was, just this idea of asking someone, do you need a hug? Do you need to brainstorm? Do you need to process? Or do you want me to just sit with you? Or do you need me to drop off a bag of groceries? Like, so, something where it's like, okay, if I said to you, how can I help you? And then all of a sudden you're like, I don't even know. I don't even know what I need.
right,
But
right,
if you're like, okay, oh, I could use a hug, or no, I don't want, and so
right.
some concrete options for folks.
That's super helpful. And just the idea, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, I think with one of your loved ones and the chips, that was like a happy moment.
Yeah.
So what are some strategies that care partners and I guess other extended family members can do to maintain connection with their loved one's memory?
There's a beautiful body of like literature called continuing bonds. And so this is that idea that, someone passes and they're still with you. Have you ever seen the movie Coco?
No.
Oh, anyways, so I recommend that movie.
Okay.
Also Tears. But it's this idea that as long as we are talking about people and talking about their memory, that they are in the afterlife experiencing this, kind of really celebratory afterlife. And beliefs aside, I think this idea that whoever, was in your life, their energy is still with you, their impact, right? And so when I have, for my chosen mom, she, gifted me with two beautiful quilts that she made. And at her service, they said something like, until like something tears or, is gone, disintegrates, their memory is still here. And they're, so how you personally do it. I've had many people, like there's a friend of mine, on the anniversary of his wife's death, he and his kids, they get a hotel room, they have pictures up, they dance, they sing, they cry, and that's their way. Another friend, has a picture up, just chit chats with her mom, just like it's like she would always chit chat with her. And so I think it's what makes sense to you in the relationship that you had. A beautiful thing that I just read, and I love this idea so much, was that, someone's mom was a, teacher. And so they would, get books and put a little sticker and say, in loving memory of blah blah blah. And then on her birthday or whatever day they wanted to, they handed these books out. Same with flowers. A man, his sister loved sunflowers, and so he would get like 30 sunflowers and just hand them to people and say,
Oh,
this is in
wow.
memory of my sister, because it's something they loved and
Right.
something that they can share with other people, even strangers, right? In keeping that ripple, because we all have an impact. We all have a story, and how do we, as stewards of those stories or keepers of those memories, how can we honor that? And again, we just had Verge's service, so that's why it's very prominent for me. But they had included a card of her pumpkin bar recipe in her own handwriting. And
Wow.
so, and so it's this idea of like, every time I make well, I've always thought of her when I make pumpkin bars, but but that was her thing. And so what can we do that maybe be out of the box of like honoring someone or bringing them into our daily life, or even, quarterly, or however you want to do it?
Right, right. And speaking of kind of a family, so
Yeah.
how can care partners navigate family dynamics that may shift after a loss, especially if caregiving responsibilities were not equally shared? So that can be a little challenging. Yeah,
I'm like gonna hide behind my book now.
right,
Wow, yes. Communication is often strained, and then you add dash of grief and, resentment and all of those things. It is very difficult. And I think one of the important pieces, again, simple, not easy, one of those things
right,
would be, if possible, can everyone gather? So it's not like he said, she said, this said,
right,
have, as, George Costanza said, so many years ago, in Seinfeld, airing of the grievances, you could,
right,
with some ground rules, but then again, that takes a level of commitment to communication and wanting to mend. Some families, it's like, well, this person was the glue, and now we're all just doing our own separate things. And that does happen. And so, it's not necessarily about that, but processing your own, like, okay, am I okay with this? Am I making up stories? Brene Brown, has this challenging, or she's not challenging, but like she brings up this challenge question of or the statement saying, the story I'm making up about this is, because we are all only coming from our own perspective. And
right,
so, someone might think, well, no, I wasn't there doing hands-on care, but I was making the money to pay for the care. Someone
right,
else might think, like, I gave up this piece of my life. And so, and no one else did, and they kept their lives going as normal. But those are the stories we're making up because we don't actually know unless you have the conversation, which may or may not happen. And so, again, grace for yourself, grace for the people that are in that proximity. And there could be a pain point of saying, like, I not only lost this person to death, but I've lost this person now to circumstance of, either the way they've processed or grieved, or,
wow.
they've left the chat, so to speak, too. So there can be a compounded grief there as well.
Wow, that's very
Mm.
deep. So my last question, maybe not on the lightest of notes, but still somewhat hopeful. So for care partners listening to this podcast, what, I guess, final tips might you have for helping them take care of themselves physically and mentally, both, I guess, before a loss and then also after a loss?
Yes, and I love the not light topics that we can talk about. So
Right,
you're
right,
like,
right.
but so for anyone listening who's in the thick of things, I want to just talk a little bit more about what I briefly touched on, mindful moments, or this idea of informal meditation. So an actual thing you can do, you might be washing your hands a lot, right? So in that moment, wash your hands, feel the water. Notice the bubbles. Notice the sensation on your hands. Just be present to washing your hands. That small act of bringing your attention to the present moment helps to regulate your nervous system, helps you come into the present moment, right? So then it helps, because if we're in fight flight, we're just like going, going, going. Like, where can in your day, not adding something extra, not telling you to go, like do something that feels impossible right now. But if you are washing your hands, if you are folding laundry, I mean, I'm not a great fan of folding laundry, but if it's fresh out of the dryer and it's warm, And then that might lead to some organic gratitude. Oh, I have the ability to wash these things, or, we have clothes, or someone made these clothes. And you can kind of get a little, I mean, I can get real far afield of like appreciation for what is actually happening. Because again, you're probably not saying like, oh, I'm so glad that we are, going through this thing. But there could be a moment of, wow, I have hot and cold
Right.
running water in my home. Many people in the world don't have this. What do the soap suds look like? And maybe there's some, and then bubbles are fun, and not, again, I'm not saying, do something so far afield. It could be, you know, when the person, what that you're caring for, maybe it's putting on a piece of music that you both enjoy or that has a memory, and you're just present to listening to the music. Um, I was a hospice volunteer, and I went and sat with a woman, and she didn't speak English. She was Italian. And so I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to bring music and, listen. So I loaded it up with like the Brat Pack, like, I mean, like the
Right.
Italian crooners, and she wanted La Bamba. And
Okay.
I know, and
So
she,
fun.
the enjoyment and the way her face lit up. But again, I didn't know, so I didn't assume, and I asked, and she surprised me, and then we both got to enjoy that. So again, don't forget that the person that you are caring for is a person,
Right.
because it can become a body. It can become like a task and a thing to do. And I mean that in no disrespect, because I have personally provided care, and I've also witnessed and supported people who have provided care. But, ask them a question, what would you like? What's important to you right now? How do you feel about this? And actually get curious about what that experience is like. You can also, so taking those mindful moments, it might be, if you don't feel, if you don't have time to even go for a walk, maybe, you can step outside of your door, and we talked earlier, let the sun hit your face. And
Right.
if it's sunny, or if there's a bird singing, and again, just taking a moment to be in the present will help. Also, soft belly breathing. So that is a breath technique where you're breathing in through the nose and you're expanding your belly as far as you can, which is not a normal thing that we do, but you breathe in as deeply as you can through the nose and then exhale through the mouth. You can do it through pursed lips, like you're breathing through a straw. And what that does, even a couple of those, uh, 5, 3, 1, whatever, it tells your vagus nerve, which is the nerve that runs from the back of your, brainstem here, the skull, and into your intestines. And so it is a long thing, and it tells your body that you're safe in that moment.
Wow.
And it is so powerful. And so when you can, remember, just take a deep inhale through the nose and exhale through the mouth. You might even, if the person that you're caring for is in a distress or in pain, you might see if you can co-regulate and do some breathing together and just be silent. We often want to fix, and so sometimes fixing isn't what's called for, and it's being with the discomfort of the sadness of the loss of the grief, and like allowing that to be, because we, but we come so quick, and it's like, okay, well, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. And maybe that person just needs a moment to be with you, or to be, or seen as a human, and again, I say that with so much love and compassion. But we can start to do to people versus do with people,
Right.
and it's an easy thing to slip into, especially if you're like I had mentioned earlier, you're going from one thing to the next, and
Right.
you're stretched thin. So what would it be like to take a moment, feeling your feet on the floor, just getting curious and going like, what do I feel? Is there air temperature? Is there heat? Is there coolness? Anything to bring you back into your body from your head.
Right.
Because, and anything, sound, body sensations, that's all in the present moment. And in the present moment, then there can be the opportunity to respond versus react. So instead of this knee jerk, we're going, going. Okay, I've washed my hands. Or I've taken a few mindful breaths before I go into their room, or I'm on the way to the doctor and, we're doing some breathing together. Something where in that moment you can be present with what is, and even if it sucks, you can be like, this sucks, and name it. Because when we're trying to, like, oh, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, like that, your body knows it's not fine.
Right.
Your body's going to be like, no, no, no. Um, you know, and sooner, and unfortunately, and this is a staggering thing to hear, but oftentimes people who are providing care, their lifespan gets shortened because of the stress.
Right.
And often if you are providing care and you are over the age of 70, you might, and statistically, die before the person you're caring for. And so and I say that not to be an alarmist, but to
Right.
say, like, what you and I are talking about right now is so important. You
Right.
know, regulating your system, finding support, getting help where you can, because, you know, you don't want to be that statistic. And it is hard. It is hard what they're going, and if I'm speaking to someone, what you're going through. And you are not alone, and it can feel overwhelming. And that is when grace, compassion, and maybe a little humor can go a long way.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And also, like,
Yeah.
reminding all of us, like, the person we're caring for, they're really, really important. But the caregivers, I think a lot of times get
Yes.
overlooked and they feel guilty
Yes.
for taking a break, guilty for sharing their own emotions and feelings. So it's really important for the caregivers to also care for
Yes.
themselves and to have a break and to have some joy and make sure they're going to their doctor's appointments,
Yes.
eating well, and doing all of the things because you have to be strong and be around as well. And it's okay. You don't have to apologize for it. You have to
Yeah.
fill your cup as well. So,
Yes, and I don't have it right now, but I was just at a conference, and they were talking about this, and there is a great resource that I will send you so that you can share with your audience. And
okay.
because it is all about that, about, the caregiver, and how it's called blank space or something. Anyways, but it's like negative space. So in a picture, you have negative space, and if that negative space, I don't know, it's a beautiful metaphor. I can't do it
Okay.
justice, but yes, because that is such an important piece, and it does often get overlooked, in the in the work of care.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your time and your talent and all your great suggestions with us today. And I really appreciate it.